Welcome to getting started with the VMware, it's the VMware Cloud Provider Program, but it should actually just be one VMware. So I'm not quite sure what's happened there. So, important point, and you'll probably notice that nobody's been making a joke about the disclaimer slide this year. That's because revenue and recognition told us specifically don't joke about the disclaimer. And the reason why I'm calling it out is because the disclaimer slide is really important. It's about the forward-looking statements. If we talk about any futures, certainly me from a VMware perspective, Richard can talk about what he wants because he doesn't work for VMware, then anything that I say may be open to interpretation. So just consider that if I do say anything about the futures, that it may not end up in a future product release. Another important point to note is the VMware vCloud Air network, which was what this session was originally called. There's been a program name change at VMware. So the program is now called the VMware Cloud Provider Program. Why have we changed the name? Well, VMware used to have its own public cloud offering, vCloud Air, and that was acquired by OVH a few months ago. So it didn't really make a lot of sense from VMware's perspective to keep a name that was essentially positioning a cloud provider's cloud. So we made the conscious decision to change our program name and fit that into to represent more of what VMware is doing now. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the cloud provider program is, and then we'll dive into it from there. So looks like they've took our introduction slides out, so our faces have gone. So quick introduction to who I am. I'm David Hill. I'm a technologist with VMware's technical marketing in the newly named VMware Cloud Provider Program. So I've been with VMware about 7 years. That's when I happened to meet Richard when he used to work there. And I've been essentially working with VMware's cloud technology for the past 7 years, building public and private clouds using vCloud Director. I then spent 3 years in vCloud Air doing technical marketing, and then I've moved over to the Cloud Provider Program. Richard, want to introduce yourself?
Morning, folks. So I'm Richard Stinton, and as Dave said, I used to work for VMware back in the early days. I was there for 7 yees, from ESX2 up to ESX55, and then I went off and joined some startup cloud providers using the technology. Spent a little bit of time at Microsoft Azure as well, and now I'm back working with a Houston, Texas cloud provider called Island, although as you can probably tell, I'm based in London. So a great pleasure to be here working with Dave again, and looking forward to Barcelona in a couple of weeks. Yeah. So I'll go and sit down while he talks.
Yeah, and just for clarification, I live in Texas, clearly born and bred there. So you all know what I mean. So I just want to kind of cover what the VMware Cloud Provider Program is. How many people in the room are service providers? Okay, a few, okay. How many people in the room who aren't service providers are using a public cloud of any variety today? Okay. How many people are using a VMware-powered public cloud? Okay. Richard, you're a sales guy. You need to start talking to these people. So essentially, what the VMware Cloud Provider Program is it's 4,000 service providers globally. It's actually now 4,500. They're spread across 116 countries, and they currently manage over 3 million virtual machines. Now, why is that important if you're not a service provider? What interest is of that to a consumer? Well, when you think about this, from someone who's looking to leverage the public cloud, there's a lot of challenges around that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But essentially, one of the key challenges is around data location. You don't always have a data center where you need it. And that was always a key challenge for VMware's public cloud, vCloud Air. They didn't have data centers in all the locations. So what VMware has done is put this cloud provider program together to essentially allow VMware customers, people who are running vSphere in their on-prem data centers, to leverage a cloud provider anywhere in the world. And you can see pretty much on this map, there's not many places we're not. Russia, not so much, but the rest of the world, we're pretty much everywhere. And you can see, certainly in the US and Europe and out into Australia and Asia Pacific, we have a number of different offerings. So we have like vCloud Direct to hybrid clouds, we have disaster recovery offerings, you can do desktop as a service. So any enterprise customer or any small, medium business that's looking to leverage a public cloud provider, they can go out and go to these different partners. And these are all partners of VMware. They're not VMware businesses. They're all third-party cloud providers that are running VMware software to help provide you capabilities. So essentially, it's all based around a core set of capabilities. Now, everybody knows there's a couple of big public cloud providers like AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud. And in today's market, pretty much anyone can provide you an infrastructure as a service cloud. You know, it's not the most difficult thing to stand up anymore. You throw some servers in a room, deploy vCloud Director on the top, and you've got an infrastructure as a service cloud. So what a lot of our cloud provider partners are doing now is they're providing a lot of key differentiators to just the core infrastructure as a service platforms. You know, if you just want to go run one VM, a lot of people just go to AWS, swipe their credit card and spin up a VM and throw Windows on it. We all know it's not difficult. How many people use AWS here? Okay, how many people are using Azure? Oh. So you all know what I mean. It's very simple to use. It's very easy just to deploy virtual machines. Well, a lot of the capabilities that VMware's cloud provider program's about is all these value-added services. So like disaster recovery capabilities, building out those capabilities. And Island's a great example, and Richard's going to show you later on how you can get started in Island, some tips and tricks around what Island do, and how you can build out your infrastructure with them. Things like migration as well. Migration is probably one of the biggest headaches you have in moving workloads to the cloud. And one of VMware's core goals is to make that as simple as possible, is to just move workloads back and forth. So all these kind of value-added services are very key when you're looking at these cloud providers, because the first names on everybody's tongue are like AWS and Azure, and obviously you've got the VMware Cloud on AWS as well, which is another differentiating offering. So when you're actually exploring this, you need to look at what these providers offer you. Do they offer you the value-added services? For those people who are using AWS, anyone ever phoned their support offerings? No one's ever phoned them? You have phoned them? Yeah, how'd it go? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you see, a lot of the VMware-based cloud providers, that's one of their key areas. You know, Rackspace is a great example. They're all about support. You know, Island as well. Every time I have an issue, you just phone them up, you send them an email, they're there to help you. You know, these bigger ones, you have to go pay them quite a lot of money to get the support. So think about those kind of differentiators when you're looking at it. Very quickly, a lot of the cloud providers, VMware love badges, by the way, so we have all these certified offerings. And it's very important because it gives you, as a customer, the understanding that these meet a predetermined set of architectural frameworks. So you get like the IaaS powered, the hybrid cloud powered, you know, disaster recovery as a service powered, all those kind of things. So it's very valuable to help understand the key kind of frameworks that go in there, so you know it's not just someone like me who's got some servers in the back of my garage and I've just stuck some software on there and now I'm suddenly a really good cloud provider, you know. So it gives you that comfort when you're looking at them. So why would you use it? What's the benefits? You know, why are people coming to the VMware Cloud Provider Program? As I mentioned, those 4,500 service providers, they have a lot of customers. Those 3 million VMs is growing every day. So why are they coming there? Well, one of the key things is cloud migration. And we talk about cloud migration quite a lot. And it's a very interesting challenge when you're looking at cloud migration. You know, lots and lots of vendors say, it's real easy, just bring your VMs over. But realistically, when you're actually trying to move those VMs and move those workloads to the cloud, you either need to totally re-architect them, which in itself is quite a hindrance when you're thinking about moving. Trying to actually copy them to a public cloud provider is a challenge. And it's just literally, you just constantly feel like you're trying to stick square pegs in round holes. So you can talk to certain big cloud provider companies that will tell you that it's really easy. You just run a conversion on the fly and your VMs just suddenly appear in the cloud magically and they all run. Anyone remember the plate spin days? Anyone use plate spin? Anyone used to do the physical to virtual? Yeah? Remember when you used to run it and then you used to go over and you used to have to uninstall all the drivers and then reinstall the new drivers and then VMware tools would pop up and then you'd run the application and there'd be a nice little conflict and then you'd sit there and go, right, let's start all over again. It's like reliving my youth. You know, you go back and everything that you're doing now, trying to get workloads in the cloud, people are seeing the same concerns. They're running these conversions on the fly, moving them over, and then they're going, oh no, the device drivers aren't working, you know, and things really haven't moved on that much. Certainly when you look at Windows and Linux and you're moving things around to different hypervisors, it's a big challenge. So when you're thinking about that, you need to understand what the core technology is you're moving to. You know, that's one of the key things that VMware is trying to address with the cloud provider program, with VMware and AWS, is the underlying infrastructure is all vSphere based. So when you take that virtual machine and you move it over, it's all vSphere. You know, you're not taking a virtual machine from vSphere and putting it on Hyper-V. You know, they don't fit together. The fundamentals are different. So to get it over, you've got to convert it. Disaster recovery is a key example. There's loads of disaster recovery offerings. You can go from vSphere to AWS to Azure. You can go from Azure to vSphere. Do whatever you want. There's loads of tools out there. But the problem that I've found, and I've experienced this in real life, is at 3 a.m., when your data center's up in smoke and you hit the failover button, and then all of a sudden these VMs are being converted on the fly from essentially VMDKs into VHDs, taking out VMware tools, installing the new drivers, all while your data center's up in smoke and you're panicking because you're having a real-life disaster. Things don't go well. So the last thing that you want to be doing when you're in the middle of a disaster recovery is having to troubleshoot your virtual machines because you've failed over to a different hypervisor. So the kind of core key concerns that you've got to think about when you're looking at moving to the cloud. And of course, every cloud provider are always like, well, I'm the circle, I fit through the hole, what's your problem? You know, everything works, it's just rosy, come to us, we're the best cloud provider in the world. But realistically, you need to look at those considerations, what's involved in getting there. You know, I had a customer of vCloud Air a little while ago, and I won't mention any names, but the sales guy was like, it's real easy, all you've got to do is replicate your VMs to the cloud and you have a full disaster recovery solution. Realistically, he needed to think about things like networking and those kind of things, and how was he going to fail over, and how was he going to connect to his workloads. So it was actually a big project. But all it said in the tin was, bring your VMs and replicate them. So those kind of considerations are worth taking into account. So the three kind of key use cases that I found with moving to the cloud and why we're moving to the cloud is that they're based on three areas that I find really important. So seasonal bursting is a great example. So if you think, let's take a toy store as an example. 10 months of the year, they have a website serving their customers, selling them toys, and everything's fine. You know, they have a pretty much guaranteed set number of traffic. They know pretty much how many customers are going to come along. And then when it gets to about probably October, November, and the latest Ninja Turtle or fidget spinner or whatever comes out, it's coming up to Christmas, and my son sat there going, Daddy, Daddy, I want one of these. And every other child around the world is saying the same thing. They then go and start hitting this website because we've got a promotion on before Christmas, and all hell breaks loose. The website can't cope with it, there's too much load, they didn't expect it. So the way you can get around that is leveraging the cloud. You know, what traditionally happened was people would go and go, right, okay, so we have this level of commitment that we need for these 10 months. We then need to go and buy all this extra capacity to put in our data center for 2 months of the year where we've got to sell our new toys for Christmas. So it's a complete waste of money, really. It sits there for 2 months of the year. does its job for 2 months of the year, but then for the other 10 months, it's just sat there idling away. Maybe use it for a different project, but it's outlaid. So how can you use the cloud? Well, the first example is you have your on-premises data center. You know, it's pretty simple. It's running vSphere. You've got your load balancer. You've got your web applications databases. And you spin up an instance in a public cloud provider, and that can be anywhere in the world that you need it. Maybe from a a different country in the world, we'll say that. I'll get the word out eventually. You can just spin up similar instances. So you can go purchase some capacity in a cloud, throw a load balancer out there. So it can be things like F5 are a great example. You know, F5 do physical, they do virtual. It's very easy to replicate all your load balancing rules wherever you are across those geographical locations. And then you can do things like synchronizing templates. You know, we have products. vCloud Connector was one of them that we've discontinued. We've got like Hybrid Cloud Manager that helps you move virtual machines around. But you can sync those templates out from your on-prem to the public cloud. Then what you do is you simply deploy a base virtual machine, a base application that we all know and love from those templates in the public cloud. So we'll say, well, it's just a web app. And then we can simply have things like Python scripts and everything all going back and calling, asking for the latest build. So if we put things like IPsec VPNs in place, or you can have like any kind of networking connectivity between those sites, it's very easy for those applications to then connect back to your on-premises data center. You have things like app build repositories. Anyone using application repositories in their on-prem data centers? No one? Okay, it's the greatest thing in the world if you're a developer, because you just build your app, you put the latest versions in that repository, and then you can send an update out to all your different application servers, and it'll just go and deploy it. Things like continuous integration, Jenkins, those kind of products. And then essentially, it's all spun up, the latest versions deployed on there, and then your users just simply get distributed over load balancers between the two sites. So very quickly, you've solved this use case by leveraging the cloud. Because of the extra capacity that you knew you needed, you could just spin up very quickly, and then once Christmas is over and the January sales come and nobody wants to buy any toys anymore because you can't move in your house, you can just shut all this down. And you just go back to your standard infrastructure that you run for the next 10 months. And it's really easy to set up and real quick. Another key use case is things like mergers and acquisitions. Anyone ever been through a merger and acquisition from an IT perspective? Yeah? It's pretty complicated, isn't it? You know, you've got all the different IT systems. You know, one company's done it this way, you've done it this way, your way is obviously the right way because you bought them. So trying to integrate all that is quite a challenge. We've seen quite a lot of companies that get acquired, and then just before being acquired, the CIO would go out and sign up really expensive leases on data centers and all that kind of stuff, and you want to try and get out of there as quickly as possible. So how can you actually do that? Well, again, using the cloud, this is quite a standard example. You have a acquisition data center down in the left. My laser pointer's not working. With virtual machines spun up, common kind of networking types. And you can just replicate those networks and stretch those networks into the cloud provider. You know, when you look at it, there's no difference. Corporate networks, DMZ networks, etc. You can leverage the technology available as VMware customers and VMware cloud providers to just replicate those virtual machines over. Things like vCloud availability. They help you move your workloads back and forth. You then replicate those VMs over, move everything out to the public cloud, and then you can manage all those workloads from your existing infrastructure in exactly the same way that you would do on-prem. But the beauty of this is you've moved all those workloads to the public cloud, and you can now go get rid of those expensive data centers that you've acquired that you really didn't want in the first place. And it's a real easy way to get out of the data center business. Now, you hear it all the time, you know, CIOs, and you read on all the kind of high-level forums that the data center's dead and everybody's going to move to the cloud in a few years. In my opinion, the data center's never going to be dead. There's going to be applications that need to run in the data center forever. You know, how many times have you heard that the mainframe's going to die? You know, the mainframe's still alive and kicking and will be probably for a long, long time. So it's the same concept. However, as things change, more and more is moving to the cloud. New applications are being developed purely for the cloud native, using services in different cloud providers. But there'll always be a place for that data center. But this helps you move from a physical data center out to the public cloud. And then the final one is disaster recovery. This is the fastest growing cloud marketplace today, is disaster recovery in the cloud. And why is that? Well, how many people have a disaster recovery solution? Okay, quite a few. So it's a big challenge. It's expensive. You know, going and building a second data center is expensive. So by leveraging the cloud, you can very easily spin up things like Active Directory and DNS in the public cloud. You know, infrastructure never goes away. You always need to authenticate. And then you can just put connectivity between these environments. You can have things like multiple cloud environments, so you can segregate your disaster recovery workloads from your authentication infrastructure. And then you can have test and failover networks, build them out, and simply replicate those virtual machines out to the public cloud. So as I mentioned before, at 3 a.m., if you know, your air conditioner decides to explode and pour water all over all your infrastructure, you can very easily fail over those workloads out to the public cloud. So I'm going to hand over to Richard for a few minutes, who's going to do a demonstration on kind of disaster recovery in the cloud and where we're going, and then I'll come back up and talk to you a little bit more about the hybrid cloud.
Okay, so rather than sacrifice a goat to the demo gods, I recorded a video last week, and we've got two videos. One's a relatively short one and then a slightly longer one. These are all available on the iland.com website under the Knowledge Center if you ever want to look at those, and they do have audio built into them, my dulcet tones. So what I wanted to show you first of all is disaster recovery as a service. So we'll just see if this works. So this is an introductory slide that will then magically morph into a demo. So what we've got here is a simulated VMware vSphere vCenter environment that's running in our data center up in Washington, D.C. It's actually in Reston, Virginia. And what you can see here is a typical vCenter web client. We've got a bunch of virtual machines running here, and we're focusing on the highlighted VM there called Sugar CRM, which is a fairly standard open source CRM package that is quite good for demos. So that's running in our typical on-premises environment, and it's being replicated, as Dave just alluded to in his slides, down to one of our other data centers in Dallas in Texas. So this is the Sugar CRM application. We've got it presented out to the internet on sugarcrm.islandlabs.com, and you could tune into that, log into it, and work with the package quite happily. But what we're going to do is show you now the Island console, which is an HTML5 console that we've developed over the last few years that integrates VMware's vCloud Director, vSphere, vCenter, together with our disaster recovery as a service solutions. And we offer 3 different solutions, as well as infrastructure as a service, so running virtual machines. And we can see here our Sugar CRM application is replicating. This is a continuous replication solution, so we can see here we have a target RPO of 5 minutes, 300 seconds, and at the moment we're achieving an 18-second RPO, so it's a very, very low one. And we put all the statistics that we pull through from Virtual Center and the DR solutions into an award-winning Cassandra database. So you can go back in time, real time, last week, last month, last year, and see any statistics from the platform that you want to. So we can see here that we're getting a relatively consistent RPO value. And if we just go back up to the top level here, we'll see all our protection groups again. And at the top right, we can click on the failover wizard. And we can simply select whether we want to do a test or a live failover. And we actively encourage people to do test failovers very regularly. So we simply select the protection groups. We can look into the journal history if we want to, but we'll just take the latest version. And that's now going to kick off a failover. And that will typically take about 3 minutes. So what we've done now is gone into our top-level dashboard, and we can already see down there the Sugar CRM testing recovery is already rehydrating those replicated data into VMDKs and booting that up, which, as I say, takes about 3.5 minutes normally for this environment. So that's the first part of the demo, and we don't have to wait 3.5 minutes for it to come back. So I'll now hand back to Dave for a few minutes.
Thanks, Richard. So we always talk about hybrid cloud and what's going on. You know, you hear lots of terms around hybrid cloud. It's now changed into multi-cloud, and we get all these buzzwords thrown around. But essentially, what makes a hybrid? What defines a hybrid? You know, I think it was Toyota who first introduced hybrid cars, and you know, you think about things like that, and it's typically two things with two different elements. And the car's a great example. You have batteries and you have engines, you know, and everyone thought the Prius was the greatest thing in the world, and then everyone drove one and not so great. You know, Tesla now have come along and they've got rid of the hybrid model and they're just purely all electric. So what's defining that and what's changing that? Well, it is literally bringing those two things together. And for a hybrid cloud, it's essentially what makes it a hybrid data center. And when you look at this, it's essentially blurring the lines. Everything that you do starts with the user. That's the whole reason that IT exists, is because there's somewhere in your business wanting to leverage an application to do a particular thing. You know, essentially they're trying to make money. In some IT departments I've worked at over the years, they thought they existed because they were IT. But realistically, you exist because of the user. So everything's kind of changing. You know, things like the iPhone. How many people have got an iPhone or an Android phone? Right, those who didn't put their hands up, you all got Windows phones? No? Okay. So everyone's still on Nokias. So essentially what's changed though is the ability to just get your phone, go on the App Store and download an application. It happens very quickly. Whether you want a spirit level, you want a spreadsheet, software, anything that you want is available instantly at the touch of a button on your phone. And that's changed the fundamental way that a user thinks. They don't no longer want to come to work, hit Control-Alt-Delete, wait 10 minutes for the profile to load, and then go and hit their application and wait another 5 minutes for the data to come down. It's all instant, it's all on. So it's, how are you building that out now? So things like hybrid cloud, and it's a bit of a cliche, but it's very valid. For anyone who's trying to get a new line of business out, leveraging the cloud allows them to have that faster time to market. You can get those new applications out into the business. And that talk about digital transformation is every single business now is a software company. And in the keynote, we talked about Elastic Sky Pizza. Great example. Even a pizza shop is a software company. You know, Domino's is a great example. You just go on the app and order the pizzas and they turn up. You know, it's that kind of thing that's driving this. But the important thing to think about is it doesn't matter whether you're building a second data center, a third data center, you're doing colo, or you're moving to the cloud. They're fundamentally the same. The considerations are the same, whether it be networking, storage performance, security, user access, it's all the same. I once had a customer about 4 years ago say they'd move to the cloud, and it was real easy. They just put all their workloads in the cloud and set the firewall rules to any. And I was like, okay. And he was like, no, it's real simple. I don't have to worry about anything anymore. Everybody just gets in and uses my applications. I saw him again the next year, and he was like, this cloud thing is horrible. And I was like, oh really? How's the any rule going for you? You know, security is the biggest concern that we all have. So when you go to the cloud, it's no different. You need to understand what the security implications are for moving to the cloud. So think outside the box. Free your mind. The thing that you need to understand is when you move to the cloud, how many people in the room are administrators or, yeah? How many people have got servers under their desks that they still have their own names on? You know, I was terrible for it when I was an admin. I used to polish them and say goodnight to them when I went home, but they were my servers. And I make a joke of it, but essentially, IT administrators are control freaks. We want to keep control of everything, and that's fundamental to what IT does. It's very important. You know, you're in charge of the data for that business. If some guy goes off and swipes his credit card in the public cloud and spins up a load of stuff that you know nothing about, when there's a data breach, how do you deal with that? You know, that is why we are control freaks. So the challenge for us to move to the cloud is we don't want to let go of things. But you have to forget about the underlying infrastructure. We don't care about the hardware anymore. 9 times out of 10, you don't care about ESXi anymore. You will never see vCenter again in the cloud. You know, those kind of aspects is what makes it hard for an administrator and an architect to move to the cloud because they feel like they are letting go of control. So forget about what you're doing. But essentially, though, as I mentioned, just treat it as any other data center. You know, if you've got a 75 terabyte Oracle database that's doing massive amounts of IOPS, you're not going to move it to a shared infrastructure cloud. 1, because it's going to be a challenge to get the data over there. 2, licensing is going to be horrendous. And you have a lot of those considerations, no different to if you wanted to move the Oracle database out to a second data center. You know, how are you going to get the data over there? Are you going to put it in a shared vSphere cluster, or is it going on its own hardware? You know, the same considerations apply when you're looking at hybrid cloud and living in a multi-cloud world. The multi-cloud world gets even more complicated when we go back to our square pegs in round holes analogy. You've now got on-prem vSphere. You've got maybe a public cloud provider with Island, which is running vSphere. You've got some stuff in AWS, which is quite conceivable. You know, most people use things like S3 and object storage. You maybe got a bit over in Google Cloud because the Google App Engine's pretty good. How do you get control of all this in this new multi-cloud world? So we started it off with the hybrid cloud, and then we in the middle now with the multi-cloud world. And from an IT perspective, keeping control of that and managing all that is pretty challenging. And they talked about that today in the keynote with VMware's cloud services. But when you go back to the cloud provider program, one of the key differentiators, as I mentioned, of these cloud providers is those kind of managed aspects. You know, maybe you're looking at managed services, or maybe you're looking at operations support. You know, trying to keep control of all this now is getting very complicated. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Richard again. Hopefully his video has completed its disaster recovery, and Richard's going to talk you through some more stuff around the public cloud and how you can leverage it and build on that.
Okay, so I've just got 2 or 3 slides and then we'll have a look at the second demo. So I just wanted to give a little bit of an introduction to Island. So Island's been around for over 20 years now, but for the last 6 or 8 years, I guess, we've been focusing on this cloud that Dave's been referring to. And we were certainly one of the early adopters of vCloud Director when it first came out. So we have not quite as many locations as the map that Dave showed earlier, but we do have 8 locations globally, geographically spread across the 3 main continents. So the US, Western Europe, and then down into Asia Pacific and Australia. All these locations are absolutely identical. So it is exactly the same infrastructure stack, And we've chosen a stack that's based on Cisco UCS blades and rack mount servers, Cisco Nexus switching, and Nimble flash accelerated and all flash storage. We're using vCloud Director, and we're also now using NSX. So if customers are using NSX themselves on premises, there's all sorts of secret things that they can do now in terms of stretch layer 2 networking, which I'll talk about a bit more. But rather than try to do a gazillion different services, we've just decided to focus on 3 things and try and do them really well. So the first one being infrastructure as a service, so the ability to just spin up virtual machines in our cloud on a VMware platform. We do disaster recovery as a service. So we're pleased to be announcing at VMworld this year that we're now using vCloud availability, which is vSphere replication to a cloud provider. We also support 2 other VMware ecosystem partners, which I'm not allowed to name, but one of them is a red company beginning with Z, and they had quite a good party last night. And the other one's green and begins with a V, but I can't tell you any more than that. They got a party tonight, yeah, that's right. The other important thing is that we've said from the outset, and as Dave just said, you know, when you're an enterprise organization, you've spent many years building security into your on-prem infrastructure. And when you throw it in the cloud, as he says, while it's really easy to just put any rules on the firewall just to get the thing working, you probably do want to lock it down a bit afterwards. So what we've done is we've gone from the outset to build what we call a secure cloud. So we've taken best-of-breed security solutions and built those in. So the analogy I use, it's a bit like a Lexus car. You don't have a catalogue of 4,000 optional extras like you might have with a Mini or a Fiat 500. You've just got everything you'd ever want in an executive car. And we've done that same thing with the cloud. So we've baked in security, we've baked in compliance. So if you're in the financial services industry or in the healthcare industry, we're HIPAA compliant. As you can see there, we can show you our SOC 2, we can show you our ISO 27001, our ISO 20001 for quality control, PCI DSS, all these other ones. And we're very proud, as we've said, of our HTML5 console. So Cloud Director, not the best user interface in the world. I quite like it, but that's because I've just been using it for a long time. So we've built this interface on top of all the different technologies, pulling on those APIs, and indeed we've worked with the vendors I've just mentioned for them to develop better APIs so that we can pull all that together. And as Dave said, exceptional customer support. So people get to know us. We're not a massive company, so people know all our support engineers by name. They know they can pick the phone up any time of the day or night, and they'll get through. When I worked at Azure, even as an internal employee, it took me about 3 days to get through to support. Just to give some examples of customer use cases. So by far and away, our biggest customer base is in the disaster recovery as a service area. But we also work with a lot of organizations who are looking to use the cloud for some of the reasons that Dave alluded to. So new deployments. Rather than go out and buy new ESX hosts to make their clusters larger on-prem, people are deploying things in the cloud and then setting up network infrastructures, site-to-site VPNs or MPLS circuits to bring that all together. So Navigator Gas is a good example of a natural gas shipping company. They have data centers in the UK and in Poland. Their first requirement was disaster recovery from on-premises to the cloud. But they're now also setting up infrastructure as a service with us and using our cloud-to-cloud DR to protect between our London and our Manchester data center in the UK. And one of the things, as Dave mentioned, is when you do DR, you've already moved everything to the cloud. And what a lot of our customers discover, particularly in the small and medium enterprise, is that because we're running on an enterprise-grade hardware platform, when they spin up their VMs for a DR test, they discover that their VMs are rocket-powered because they're running on a really high-performing platform. So they think, well, hey, why don't we just leave it there? And as long as you've got the networking in place and you've thought that through, why wouldn't you just leave it in the cloud and then enable cloud-to-cloud DR and you can shut down your data center? And data center for SME business is often a cupboard in the hall. It's not a shiny data center. Leica Geosystems is another example of a global customer of ours who do Internet of Things. They put sensors out on large building projects like the Crossrail project in London, which is a new mass transit system running from west to east. And they're monitoring the ground to see if the ground's sinking because someone's dug a big tunnel underneath. So lots and lots of GPS-enabled sensors that are sending data back to the island cloud. And they need to do this very latency-sensitive application, so they're doing that in other locations around the world. So they leverage all our different data centers around the world. And then SaaS providers. So back in the day when I used to work for a service desk company years ago, you'd have this box full of DVDs, you'd go and install a service desk application. Now that's all being delivered from the cloud just to a URL. So we work with a large number of ISVs in the IT service management space, warehouse management, logistics, unified comms as a service, so people like Mitel. So Mitel as an example, again in the old days, you would have installed a bunch of servers in your data center that provided IP telephony. Now that can all be delivered from the cloud. And for a lot of these guys, they don't, they just send out a URL to a new customer and the customer doesn't actually know it's coming from iLand. Disaster recovery as a service, as I said, that's one of our largest areas, typically customers running on premises. We have small customers with 20 VMs, right the way through to customers running hundreds or even the low thousands of VMs that are being protected with the different solutions we mentioned. And then backup as a service, that really is the no-brainer for people wanting to put their toe in the water with cloud. So instead of spending money on storage arrays or Windows servers with an SMB drive, why not put your long-term retention of data into the cloud or your weekly, monthly backups into the cloud? Just keep some local stuff for weeklies and dailies maybe. So we work with this, as I say, this big green company, and we have tens and tens of petabytes of customer data that's being backed up to us over the internet. I reckon minimum connection you need is about 5 megabits, and then you can start to copy stuff up to the cloud. So you can go to the iLand website and you can have a 1-month free trial for 5 terabytes of data if you want to just have a play with that. Now, as Dave said, considerations. So network connectivity is probably one of the biggest considerations for working with cloud. Because if you lose your network connectivity to the cloud, you've suddenly lost everything. So internet is a lot better these days. Many people think about putting in, as a long-term investment, some decent connectivity, more than just an ADSL router. But if you're a small company, maybe that's the only choice you've got. But one of the differentiators that we have is that we do work very, very closely with all the major telcos around the world. So we're normally on net with most household name carriers to put in leased line circuits, MPLS clouds, and that sort of thing. And as I said in the previous slide, the utopia is this thing called Stretch Layer 2, which of course NSX is really helping get on board now. But the idea that you can move a VM from your on-premises facilities to the cloud and it be on the same IP address. So many applications have IP addresses hard-coded into them still. So if you can just move a VM, whether it's through replication or an import process, and it come up on the same IP address and be available to everyone on the internal network, that's utopia. And I've put there that other clouds are available apparently. So we have a number of customers who are using us for their VMware workloads, but again, through our network connectivity, we can have very fat pipes into Azure, into AWS, into Google Cloud Engine. So, typically some of our larger customers are taking a gigabit circuit directly into Amazon. So if they're doing all the new shiny stuff in Amazon or Azure or Google, you've got the high-speed connectivity there, so you don't have low latency or low speed. So, the next bit of the demo. So the first thing we wanted to see was the virtual machine come up, having been failed over through disaster recovery. So, So what we can see here is the iLand Cloud Console, and what we wanted to show here really was the fact that we can tune into any of our virtual data centers around the world, the regions. We can then drill down into our virtual data centers and these VApps, so we can see their Sugar CRM testing recovery and the virtual machine that's actually running inside there. So here we can see that we're bringing through all the information from vCloud Director and Virtual Center underneath. So we can see that we've got the ability to alter the number of CPUs, we can alter the RAM. We can see things like VM tools versions. And as I said earlier, we're putting all the performance data from Virtual Center into a Cassandra database. You can very quickly go back and look at performance metrics. We can look at the different food groups, as I like to call it, so CPU, RAM, network, storage. A lot of this is normally hidden when you put stuff in the cloud. So we can see there how the CPU has spiked when it first booted up, and it's now settled down, or that's the RAM actually. But we can see how we could look back over weeks, months, years of data when something's running permanently. And we even expose CPU ready time, which is like every admin's dream. You would never normally see that in the cloud. So when the users phone up and say that things seem to be running slowly, that's normally the first thing you look at, is the CPU ready time. And then we're exposing all the usual functionality that you'd associate: power on, power off, suspend. We can edit properties. We can add metadata, which is useful for certain things. We can snapshot VMs. We can insert virtual media. And again, something you won't find in Azure is the ability to open a virtual console through the VMRC without having to actually open RDP on the internet. So we're able to broker the Windows or a Linux console through this HTML5 browser, which we all kind of get used to in the VMworld land. So anyway, here is our Sugar CRM now running in DR. And for the purposes of the demo, it's running on a different DNS name because it's now running in Dallas. It's on a different public IP address. So we're calling it DR Sugar CRM. But we could just update the DNS records to point to the new public IP address instead. So just looking at the console dashboard in a bit more detail, as I said, we've got the 8 data centers around the world. We have customers such as Leica and Mitel that will take facilities in all the different data centers. And so we can see down the left-hand side of the console there the typical hierarchy that you associate with vCloud Director, which is region, organization or tenant name, and then you start to drill down into the virtual data center types. As I said, Leica are latency-sensitive applications, so they're taking locations that are closest to where their sensors are. We offer different types of virtual data center, so we think about pay-as-you-go, where you only pay for the resources that you consume on an hourly basis. And then we also do what's called a reservation pool, which is effectively giving the user a whole resource pool, so a number of gigahertz of CPU, a number of gigabytes of RAM and storage, and you have that all the time every month, but you pay for it every month whether or not you use it, but at least it gives you guaranteed resources. And then we have an amalgam of the two, which we call reservation plus burst. So if you spike above the amount that you're using in that reservation pool, you just pay at the pay-as-you-go rate. Oh, yeah. I must have been waffling on about something in the background there. Hey? No, I'm warbling on in the background about something in the video. We'll catch up in a minute. Yeah, so I think one of the things I was going to mention is we do work with managed service providers as well, so they will have the ability to have all different customers showing on here as well, and we use role-based access control so that depending on your username and password, you'll have different functionality. So you might have, the concept of read-only users and that sort of thing. So moving into networking, very important part, as we've said. So we're now fully supporting NSX. So for customers that are using NSX on-prem, we've got the ability to do all kinds of micro-segmentation and stretch layer 2 into the island cloud. We do also work with other networking providers, so virtual appliances from Cisco, Checkpoint, Palo Alto, you name it, Juniper. So customers sometimes will use the NSX for certain things, and then also have third-party firewalls for additional security or additional functionality. And then I mentioned earlier that we work with global telco providers as well. So we do offer co-location as well. So if you need to put in a telecoms router or Metro Ethernet switch, those sort of things. But this is looking at the NSX or vShield Edge capability within the console. So you've got the ability to, as Dave was saying, not set up firewall rules, or preferably set some firewall rules. Very powerful firewall in here. You can modify firewall rules. It's called a 5-tuple firewall, so you can set protocol, port, transport type, all these source and destination, all these kind of things. So I do actually lock it down to things like port 80 and port 3389. And the nice thing here is we've got the ability to export the firewall config to a CSV file, and then you can edit that offline, and you can keep it as a backup. And we also checkpoint the firewall rule changes, so that if you screw up, you can just go back to the previous version. And the same for network address translation. So typically coming in from the internet, you're going from a public IP address to your internal networks, and you're carrying out some kind of network address translation, either destination NAT or source NAT, and similar functionality applies there in terms of exporting and restoring good configs. And now I'm just continuing to talk on about co-location and MPLS circuits that we can support. Site-to-site VPN or IPsec VPN is by far the most popular, particularly for smaller businesses, but the larger organizations that have large numbers of VMs and planning a strategy for the future, definitely looking at the idea of MPLS circuits and direct transport. I mentioned the security and compliance aspects. So here we've decided to work with a number of very well-known security ISVs who are present here today, and one of them had a party last night that was directly next to the other party that began with a Z. So what we've done here is we've brought it all through into a shiny part of the console. And what we're able to do here is every VM that gets spun up will automatically have the opportunity to run the antivirus and anti-malware software on it. It's hypervisor-based, so it's not chewing up performance of the CPU of the virtual machines. And so we can see here we're doing malware and antivirus, we're doing vulnerability scanning, we're doing log inspection, so searching for keywords in logs, file integrity monitoring, so maybe monitoring the host's file to see if someone's edited that. VM encryption, so all our Nimble storage arrays are encrypted, so all the data stores are encrypted. But if you want to encrypt the virtual machines as well, we currently work with, again, another third party to provide VM encryption, but we will be implementing vSphere 6.5 encryption shortly as well, which will be free of charge. And then moving further down, so vulnerability scanning. As soon as you put a virtual machine up onto the internet, that public IP address is going to get scanned by another third-party SaaS provider. So if you put Windows IIS web server up as an example, out of the box, it will start to find all the vulnerabilities in there and automatically give you a remediation report of what you need to do to lock that IIS server down. Web reputation. So if you've got some VMs that are calling out to the internet, it will automatically block if they're going to malicious, known malicious websites. Again, all of these are part of the security solutions. We also use this interface as one of the ways of talking to the support team. So we can talk to support through email, through phone, and through the website. So we can see any support requests we might have open. And scrolling down towards the bottom in a minute, also we surface all our compliance reporting. So we can see here on the right, under reports, our ISO 27001, which we passed recently with no defects at all. SOC 2 and HIPAA in the US. Our penetration test results for the platform. In the UK, the Information Commissioner's Office around data protection. Privacy Shield. And we've also recently passed a relatively new certification called the Cloud Security Alliance CSA Star at the gold level. And only Microsoft Azure has that certification globally. So we're very proud of that. And then the final piece is billing. So clearly this does cost money. As I said, we have a number of different billing models, the hourly, pay-as-you-go. So things like disaster recovery, the nice thing about this is you only pay for the storage until you spin up your VMs in DR, and then we'll charge you by the hour while you're doing a DR test. So we're able to break down at the region level, at the virtual data center level, right the way down to the VM level if we want to. So here I'm drilling down into a virtual data center, and we can see there the cost per hour or per month for the virtual machines that are running pay-as-you-go. And then I think the line underneath there is our monthly reservation pool. So incidentally, if you pay monthly for a reserved capacity, that is a lot cheaper than the pay-as-you-go model. So many organizations will think about maybe taking 40% of their capacity on the reservation model. Then you can drill down through the hierarchy, maybe into a VApp, such as Pet Clinic here, which is one of my favorite applications I've carried around for years, and then maybe drill down into the virtual machine level as well. And if memory serves, that should be the end of that.
Cool.
With
Thank
3
you,
minutes
Richard.
to go.
So we've got a couple of minutes left, and I want to open it up to questions. But just finally, the cloud provider program, as I mentioned, is a number of service providers and cloud providers around the world. And this isn't the 4,500 that I talked about. This is the select set of cloud providers that have actually got booths at VMworld. So if there's any questions that you have about how you can interact with them, any services they offer, then I would recommend that you go visit their booth in the Solutions Exchange. And then, although we're in Tuesday, we've got a number of sessions that we're running, deep dives on some of the core capabilities of the VMware Cloud Provider Program. So you can see how you can automate a full disaster recovery solution using vCloud Availability and vRealize Orchestrator. Other NSX deep dives and those kind of things. And then finally, I will say, please fill out your surveys. They are important to us. It lets us know how I've done as a presenter, how Richard's done as a presenter, and essentially just gives us a good bit of feedback so we can tailor this when we go to Europe, and also gives us a bit of feedback around where we are. So I'll say thank you for coming, and then if there's any questions, please either shout out or use a mic if you have any. So thank you very much.